The other thing that's interesting about Area 51 is that in 1947, there was something that happened in the sky in that about 40 miles from Area 51. And this light that came down the sky left debris in the farmer's area and appeared to be part of a crash site. And the documents on this whole event were top secret. But this was just after World War II. And the world was at peace, and the world was interested in scientific advancement and what, just moving into the Cold War at that time. So all these supposedly secret documents went to the topic of a possible UFO crash there, or spaceship crash there. And there was apparently some metal pieces, debris that was found by a farmer and his son. But very quickly, everything was picked up and transported away in hush-hush. And you know, when there's mystery around things, everybody thinks something's going on. And the more secretive things are, the more everybody wants to know. The best way to get press is keep a secret. And they have a museum actually dedicated in the area, a place called Roswell, which is a little town near Area 51. And they believe that there was a alien, this fellow right here, that was retrieved from this crash site. Now that is not the actual alien. That is a museum. This is a museum, UFO museum in Roswell, and this is actually part of their display case. I thought that was a real scientist or a real doctor looking, you know, at a picture of that release, looking at that alien. But this is actually, if you walk into that museum and pay your $5 or whatever, this is part of the displays that you'll walk through. So that's the alien in the display. But anyways, there's so many people that believe that this alien was retrieved and taken to Area 51 and hidden there. Now, the idea of aliens visiting the Earth from outer space goes back before 1947. This fellow, Eric von Daniken, he postulates in this book called Chariots of the Gods that there is evidence of visitation from aliens on the Earth before. And well, pyramids, for example, but he refers to many ancient pagan worship sites as landing strips for UFOs, tops of mountains that are flattened out and cut off, landing area, and so on. You know, I read this book when I was about 17 or 18 years old. And, you know, I'm not going to give you my opinion on it, because that's why I'm not here to do that tonight. But I'll tell you one thing, it did have a couple of quotes from the Bible. And he postulates that the Bible speaks of visions of alien visiting the Earth. And I'll cover that in a second. I'll tell you what that did for me. When I was about 18 years old, I hadn't read the Bible. So when I read this book and it quoted Ezekiel chapter 1, I thought, you know, I'll go read that and see if it sounds anything like a space alien. So I went and found a Bible and I read Ezekiel chapter 1. And I read some of his other quotes. And then I just kept reading the Bible. So that was my introduction to the Bible. So I'll say one thing for this fellow. He made me go and do a little homework. And that was, 18, so that's like 30 years ago for me, that I actually started reading the Bible. Now, one thing that kind of tweaked me, and aliens isn't the only subject that I find interesting. There's many, many really interesting things happening in the world today, and in history, and how they all tie together. And one of the things that I've done some investigation on is some of the ancient worship of non-Christian or non-Jewish civilizations. And one thing that they worshiped in Egypt was Osiris. Osiris was a representation of an Egyptian god. And he had one eye in the sky. And that one eye was in fact the sun. And henceforth the Egyptians worshipped the sun as a god. And the pharaohs of Egypt was the incarnation of the sun on earth. So the pharaohs would be worshipped as the sun god in the flesh. What I find interesting is here's a guy quoting Bible things, but he very covertly introduces Egyptian worship into his picture on his book, which is the Eye of Osiris. And just a side note, there are many, many people today that actually worship ancient Egyptian gods like Horus and Osiris and so on. Osiris was also king of the dead. If you look at Freemasons, Illuminati, and all these supposed secret society groups, ultimately they worship sun god. You'll see sun symbols all over their temples, and they'll come across as very charitable work in the community, but ultimately leading to a form of worship, of solar worship and Luciferic worship, these kind of things. So when I see sun symbols and some of these other pagan symbols, it's a little tip to me that there may be something else going on in what they're trying to promote. Anyhow, Von Daniken claimed that the Bible is the greatest UFO book of all time. And he quotes an example of Elijah from 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11, where there's a vision. Elisha sees Elijah get caught up in a whirlwind and raised up into heaven. And it's as if there's these horses pulling this chariot and it takes them up into the heavens. So he postulates that the chariot was a spaceship. And the spaceship took Elijah away. Interesting side note on that is Elijah did appear about 17 years later to visit another king in Israel, so he didn't stay up there. And a lot of people think he went to heaven and remained there forever, but Bible chronology tells us that he was back on earth. So he may have been caught up and came down again. So anyways, that's one of Von Daniken's claims to a very ancient visitation on this earth by aliens.